The day we put my brother in the ground, his business partner handed me a business card. Just a card, turned face down. He pressed it into my palm during the receiving line, squeezed my hand once, and walked away before I could say anything. On the back, in blue pen, "Don't go home tonight. Call me first, please." I slipped it into my coat pocket and forgot about it for the next 4 hours. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes with planning a funeral for someone who was 31 years old. My brother Eli wasn't sick, he wasn't in the military. He didn't have a dramatic job. He was an accountant who coached Little League on Saturdays and made the best smoked brisket in our county. He died of what the initial report called cardiac arrhythmia, a heart event, they said, sudden and unexplained in an otherwise healthy young man. I'm Mara. I'm 29. I was a paralegal at a mid-sized firm in Columbus, Ohio. I say was because everything that happened in the 4 months after that funeral changed what I do, where I live, and who I trust. But I'll get to that. The receiving line that afternoon felt like it lasted a year. My sister-in-law, Trish, stood at the front in a black dress I recognized as something she'd bought for a work gala 2 winters ago. She cried beautifully. I noticed that immediately, the way some people cry where their face stays mostly still and just the tears fall, clean and photogenic. I told myself I was being ugly, that grief looked different for everyone, that I was projecting because I was destroyed and couldn't stop my own nose from running and my mascara from tracking down to my jaw. My parents were the ones who broke me. My mom held Eli's framed photo against her chest for most of the service, like she could bring him back through sheer pressure. My dad, who hadn't cried at his own father's funeral 11 years ago, sat in the front pew with his head in his hands for 40 minutes straight. I sat between them and held both their hands and didn't say a word because there was nothing to say. Eli was my person. Our parents loved us both equally and all of that, but Eli and I were close the way some siblings are close. The kind where you text each other random videos at midnight and still have sleepovers in your 30s when one of you is going through something hard. When I went through my divorce at 26, I spent 6 weekends in a row at his house. He made breakfast every morning. He never once told me what I should have done differently. I found the business card in my coat pocket at 9:30 that night when I was standing in my parents' kitchen trying to figure out where Trish had put the coffee filters. The name on it read, Owen Hartley. Hartley and Voss Financial Consulting. I knew the name. Eli had mentioned him dozens of times. Owen was his business partner. They'd started the consulting firm together 4 years ago, bootstrapped it out of Eli's second bedroom, grown it to 12 employees. Eli always described Owen as the one with the vision, himself as the one with the discipline. I'd met Owen twice, briefly, at firm holiday parties. He seemed quiet, competent. Not the kind of person who passed you secret notes at funerals. I called him. He answered on the first ring, which told me he'd been waiting. Mara. His voice was flat, controlled. Are you alone? I looked around the empty kitchen. Yes. Are you at your parents' house? Yes. Don't tell anyone you're calling me. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? Early, before Trish gets to the office. Something about that last part, before Trish gets to the office, made my stomach drop. What's going on? I asked. He paused. I've been sitting on something for 2 weeks and I can't sit on it anymore. I tried to convince myself it wasn't what I thought it was. Another pause. I can't do that anymore. I met him at a diner in Worthington at 7 the next morning. He was already there when I arrived. Both hands wrapped around a coffee mug, wearing the same suit he'd had on at the funeral. I don't think he'd slept. He waited until the waitress took our order and moved away. Then he reached into his bag and set a manila folder on the table between us. 3 weeks before Eli died, he said, he came to me and said he wanted to change his life insurance beneficiary. I stared at him. He'd had Trish listed as primary since they got married, standard. But he came to me specifically because he wanted advice on whether he could do it quietly, without going through the firm's shared HR system, which Trish had access to. She handles all the administrative accounts. Has for 2 years. Why did he want to change it? My voice came out smaller than I expected. Owen looked at the folder but didn't open it yet. He'd found something. He didn't show me everything, I think he was still processing it himself, but he told me that he discovered Trish had been moving money, small amounts at first, transfers from their joint business account to a personal account he didn't know existed. Over about 18 months, it totaled somewhere around $40,000. The number hit me like something physical. He confronted her. He was about to. He wanted to get documentation first. He asked me to help him pull together the financial records before he said anything to her. Owen finally opened the folder. He turned it around so I could see the papers inside. He died 9 days later. I looked at the pages. Bank statements, transfer logs, dates, amounts, account numbers I didn't recognize. The life insurance policy, I said slowly. He never got to change it. He died before the paperwork went through. Owen's jaw was tight. The policy pays out $420,000. Trish is still the primary beneficiary. She filed the claim 11 days ago. I sat back in the booth. The diner noise, dishes clattering, a kid 2 tables over asking for syrup, a country song on a speaker somewhere, felt very far away. You think she knew he was going to confront her? Owen didn't answer right away. I think the timing is something that can't be ignored. The doctors said it was a heart thing. Arrhythmia. I know what they said. He reached into the folder and pulled out a single sheet, a printout of something I didn't immediately recognize. I have a friend. Toxicology. I'm not going to tell you his name because I don't want to get him in trouble, but I described the timeline to him. Ely's symptoms in the weeks before he died, the fatigue, the irregular heartbeat episodes, the nausea he kept calling a stomach bug. I described all of it. He slid the sheet toward me. I'm a paralegal. I know how to read documents. I read that one twice. Digoxin toxicity, I said. At high enough doses, it mimics cardiac arrhythmia. It's undetectable in a standard tox screen unless you know to test for it specifically. It's odorless. Tasteless, you can get it. Owen stopped. It can be administered gradually. Over weeks. My brother had been complaining about being tired for 6 weeks before he died. He'd chalked it up to work stress. He'd started going to bed at 8:30. He'd lost 8 pounds without trying. I thought I was going to be sick right there in the booth. Why didn't you go to the police? I asked. My voice was steady. I have no idea how. I don't have proof. I have circumstantial evidence and a theory from someone who can't put their name on it. If I go to the police with this and Trish finds out, the insurance money moves, evidence disappears, and I look like a grieving business partner making accusations. He looked at me directly. But you have something I don't. What? Standing. You're his next of kin after your parents. You have a right to request an independent autopsy review. You have a right to petition for a hold on the insurance payout pending an investigation. He paused. And you have his laptop. I blinked. What? He told me he'd backed everything up on his personal laptop. His own copies of the transfer records, his research into the account she was using, some notes he'd written. He was building a file. Owen's voice dropped slightly. He told me that if anything ever happened to him, he'd left the laptop with someone he trusted. He said he'd told that person to give it to you. I went home. I called my best friend Donna from college, who had been Eli's emergency contact through grad school and still had a key to his old apartment. The one he'd kept for years as a kind of home office before he and Trish bought the house. Donna met me there that afternoon. In the back of the hall closet, in a soft case behind a box of baseball equipment, was his laptop. The password was the name of our childhood dog and the year our grandmother came to this country. I got it on the second try. What was on that laptop took me 3 hours to fully understand. Trish hadn't just been skimming the business accounts. She had a second life. I don't know how else to describe it. There was a man. An apartment in Pittsburgh 40 minutes away. Credit card statements that Eli had photographed with his phone. Charges to a lease cosigner. Furniture purchases. A gym membership. A gym she had never once mentioned. The $40,000 hadn't gone toward debt or an emergency. It had built a parallel life. There were also notes in a folder Eli had simply labeled questions. He'd been methodical about it. Dates, amounts, things Trish had said that didn't add up. gaps in her schedule. There was a note from about 3 weeks before he died that said, "She knows I've been looking. Be careful." I closed the laptop and sat on the floor of that empty apartment for a long time. I want to tell you I immediately called the police. I want to say I knew exactly what to do. I didn't. I sat there for probably 40 minutes just breathing because the alternative was coming apart completely, and I couldn't afford to do that. Then I thought about what I do for a living. I work for attorneys. I have spent 5 years learning how evidence works, how investigations work, what you need before you walk into a room with law enforcement so you don't get dismissed. I knew that walking in with a laptop full of files and a theory about digoxin wasn't going to be enough. I knew that I needed a chain of custody. I needed to not touch anything without documenting it first. I called my supervising attorney. His name is not important here, but he picked up on a Saturday afternoon and he didn't make me feel crazy. He said, "Don't move the laptop. Document where you found it. Photograph everything in place. Then bring it to me Monday. Don't contact Trish. Don't tell your parents yet. And request that insurance hold today, that you can do yourself, and that clock matters." I filed the request to hold the life insurance payout that same evening through the State Insurance Commissioner's online portal, citing a pending inquiry into the circumstances of death. It felt impossibly small. One form, a few hundred words. But it bought time. On Monday, my attorney helped me contact the Franklin County Sheriff's Office. We brought the documentation Owen had given me, the laptop properly preserved, and the toxicology information, with Owen's friend ultimately agreeing to provide a signed professional opinion once the potential criminal nature became clear. The detective assigned to the case, a woman I'll call Detective Rourke, sat across from me for 2 hours in a conference room and read through everything without saying much. At the end, she looked up and said, "The original autopsy did not test for cardiac glycosides. She requested an independent forensic review. It took 11 days. The results came back on a Tuesday evening. I was at my parents' house. I'd been spending most nights there, helping Mom with the things that needed doing, watching my dad sit in the backyard and look at nothing. Detective Ver called me directly. The forensic review found elevated levels consistent with digoxin toxicity in your brother's preserved tissue samples," she said. "We're opening a homicide investigation." I walked out onto my parents' back porch and stood in the cold for a long time. November in Ohio is unforgiving. Gray sky, dead grass, wind off the fields that cuts right through whatever you're wearing. I hadn't cried since the funeral. Not really. I'd been moving too fast. Now I just stood there and felt the weight of it. My brother had known he was in danger. He had prepared. He had thought about me specifically, had left a trail for me to find because he trusted me to do something with it. He was right. He knew me. Trish was arrested 2 weeks later, on a Thursday morning at the Pittsburgh apartment, the one she'd been paying for with my brother's money. She was with the man she'd been seeing for nearly 2 years. When the detectives knocked on the door, she apparently asked them to give her a minute to get dressed. My parents found out the same morning. I was there when Detective Rourke called my mother. I watched my mom's face go through about 11 different things in the space of a minute. Confusion, then understanding, then a grief so particular and specific that it's not like any grief I'd ever seen before. It was the grief of realizing the person you'd welcomed into your family had taken your child from you on purpose. My dad didn't say anything for a very long time. Then he said quietly, "She sat with us at the hospital." That's the detail that keeps me up at night, if I'm honest with you. Trish had sat with us at the hospital the night Eli was brought in. She had held my mother's hand. She had cried. She had been the one to call the rest of our extended family. The charges filed were first-degree murder, financial exploitation, and fraud. The prosecution built their case on the toxicology findings, the financial records, the digital evidence on Eli's laptop, and, this part I didn't know about until later, security footage from the Pittsburgh apartment building that showed Trish's car there during 3 separate windows when she'd told Eli she was at conferences or visiting her sister in Cincinnati. One of the most significant pieces of evidence came from Eli's notes. He had been meticulous about dating every entry. The prosecution was able to show a timeline. Trish had escalated the financial transfers in the 2 months directly after Eli told her he wanted to review their joint accounts together. His questions document had entries that showed increasing concern. The last entry, written 9 days before he died, was 4 words: "She's not going to stop." The trial lasted 8 days. I testified on day 4. I was on the stand for 2.5 hours. The defense attorney tried to characterize me as a grieving sibling with a fixation, suggested I had manufactured the timeline of discovering the laptop, implied that Owen and I had some kind of personal motivation to destroy Trish's reputation. I'd been prepped well. I answered every question calmly. I'd been a paralegal for 5 years. I knew the rhythm of cross-examination, knew what they were doing, knew that my job was simply to tell exactly what happened and not get pulled off the thread. When the defense attorney asked me if I wanted my sister-in-law to be guilty, I looked at her and said, I wanted my brother to still be alive. That wasn't an option anymore. There was an audible shift in the room after that. The jury came back in 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Trish was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder charge, with additional consecutive sentences on the financial counts. The insurance payout was seized. The money that could be recovered from the Pittsburgh account, about $22,000 of it, was returned to Eli's estate, which went to my parents. Owen and I have talked a lot in the months since. He still runs the firm. He told me recently that he keeps a framed photo of Eli on his desk and has lunch with our dad about once a month. I don't know if that's a comfort or something else, but it means something. The thing people don't tell you about this kind of grief, the kind where someone you loved was taken deliberately, is that the anger and the sadness don't replace each other. They just exist at the same time, permanently. I can be grateful that she's in prison and still be completely devastated that Justice doesn't give me back Sunday mornings at Eli's house with bad coffee and his ridiculous obsession with whatever documentary series he was watching that week. I think about that business card a lot. The way Owen pressed it into my hand in a receiving line and turned away. He'd been carrying that knowledge for weeks at that point, had been trying to figure out if he was wrong, if he was being paranoid, if grief had distorted his perception. He told me later that handing me that card was the hardest thing he'd ever done, because he knew what it would mean for my family if he was right. He was right. My brother had been careful, he'd been scared and careful, and he'd thought of me. He'd thought about who would look, who would understand what they were looking at, who wouldn't be too shattered to move. I don't know whether to be honored by that or heartbroken. I think it's both. I think it's always going to be both. There's something I found on that laptop that I've never told anyone until now. In the same folder as the financial documents and the questions file, there was a draft of a letter. It was addressed to me. It wasn't finished. Maybe 2 paragraphs, the second one trailing off mid-sentence. He'd clearly written it during a moment of real fear, and then maybe convinced himself it wasn't necessary, that he was being dramatic, that he'd deal with the situation and everything would be fine. The first paragraph started, Mara, if you're reading this, something went wrong and I need you to know that I was not careless with my life. I've read it more times than I can count. He wasn't careless with his life. He just trusted the wrong person with it. I left the paralegal firm 6 months ago. I'm now working with a nonprofit that advocates for forensic review in cases where sudden death may have been misclassified. I'm not an investigator. I'm not a detective. I'm someone who knows how to read documents and navigate bureaucratic processes and who learned the hard way that those skills can matter enormously when everyone else is too deep in grief to function. Eli would have had something to say about that. He would have made some joke about me finally finding a job title that sounded as serious as I always took myself. He would have texted me something ridiculous at midnight to celebrate. I keep my phone on the nightstand. Habit, I guess. I've thought a lot about what would have happened if I'd never found that card in my coat pocket. If I'd sent it through the wash, the way I do with half the things I shove in there at events. If Owen had lost his nerve and never written anything on the back of it at all. If I had been the kind of person who, in the face of unbearable loss, simply went home and pulled the blankets over my head and let the world move on without her. The honest answer is that Trish would have collected $420,000. She would have grieved publicly and beautifully for a respectable period of time. She would have eventually moved to Pittsburgh. And my brother would have been a sad story, a healthy 31-year-old who died suddenly. A cautionary tale about how you never know, about how life is short, about how you should call the people you love more often. That version of events almost happened. It almost happened because the systems designed to catch what was done to Eli weren't built to catch it. A standard autopsy doesn't test for digoxin unless someone asks. Insurance companies process claims. They don't investigate them unless someone files a hold. Police don't open homicide investigations based on a grieving sister's intuition. Every single door I walked through required me to already know it existed and to knock on it myself. I think about that constantly in the work I do now. How many people didn't have an O-in? How many families buried someone and asked questions quietly among themselves, and eventually stopped asking because they didn't know what a forensic review was, or that they had the right to request one? How many people were too deep in grief to function, which is the most natural thing in the world, and so the window closed? What carried me through those weeks wasn't courage in the dramatic sense. I want to be clear about that. I was terrified the entire time. I cried in my car more times than I can count. There were nights I lay awake running through every possible way I could be wrong, every way I might be about to blow up what remained in my family over a theory. What kept me moving was something simpler and less cinematic. I knew how to read documents. I knew what questions to ask. I had spent 5 years watching attorneys build cases from paper trails, and when I sat down with Owen's folder in that diner booth, something in me recognized the shape of what I was looking at. Eli had counted on that. He knew me well enough to know I wouldn't fall apart before I looked. There's something I've come to understand about the people who do harm the way Trish did. Slowly, quietly, while maintaining every appearance of love and loyalty. They rely on a particular kind of trust. Not blind trust exactly, but the reasonable trust that most of us extend to the people sleeping beside us, sitting across from us at the dinner table, holding our mother's hand at the hospital. They rely on the fact that betrayal at that scale is genuinely hard to believe, and that disbelief protects them longer than anything else could. The thing that undid Trish wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It wasn't a single smoking gun. It was Eli's patience and precision in documenting what he found, Owen's decision to act even without certainty, and my refusal to let grief make me passive. 3 ordinary people making 3 unglamorous choices. That's what it actually took. I don't have a clean way to wrap that up. I miss my brother every single day. Justice didn't fix that, it never does. But I think there's something worth holding on to in the fact that he prepared carefully, that he trusted the right person with what he knew, and that the truth came out because enough people refused to let it disappear quietly. He was not careless with his life. He just deserved better than what he got. They all do.